Hello and welcome back to the military matrix. The Crimea collapse, Ukraine shatters Russia's strategic corridor, is what today's headline reads and what we're diving into right now in detail. What we are witnessing is nothing less than a dramatic shift in the war, one that could redefine how logistics, geography, and strategy interplay in the ongoing conflict between Crimea, Ukraine, and Russia. For years, Russia has sought to establish and maintain a land bridge connecting mainland Russia to Crimea, a strategic corridor that would ensure uninterrupted supply, reinforcement, and control of the peninsula. Let's start by looking at the corridor itself. This so-called land conduit runs from Russian territory through occupied parts of southern Ukraine, including the southern reaches of the Zaporizhzhia Oblast and the Kherson Oblast, and on into Crimea. That band of territory provides Russia with overland access to the peninsula, bypassing or supplementing the more exposed sea and bridge routes. For Russia, this corridor was more than just a route. It was an operational lifeline. It enabled them to move troops, equipment, fuel, supplies, connect rail links, and maintain dominance on the Black Sea and in southern theaters of operation. Analysts have described it as a key part of Russia's strategy for Crimea and beyond. But now, that picture is changing and fast. Ukraine has been mounting strikes and operations precisely aimed at severing or degrading that corridor, paying attention to critical infrastructure, bridges, roads, supply nodes, rail lines. For example, one notable vulnerability has been the crossing near the Chonhar Strait, which links mainland Ukraine to Crimea. Ukraine has damaged the road and rail bridges here, disrupting the flow of logistics. Why is this so crucial? Because if Russia cannot reliably sustain that corridor, Crimea becomes much harder to reinforce, much more costly to supply, and that in turn invites Ukrainian forces to strike deeper, longer term. It increments from tactical blips into a strategic pivot point. One analyst even said, if the bridge to Armyansk is destroyed, Crimea will actually turn into an island. Let's look at how Ukraine has methodically targeted the corridor in recent operations, flipping the momentum. Ukraine's targeting of the bridge networks, supply hubs and transportation arteries has forced Russia into reactive logistics, diversions, exposure. From satellite imagery and open-source intelligence, it is now suggested that Russia has even reduced use of the highly symbolic Kerch bridge as a military supply route, allegedly shifting more dependence onto land routes which are now under fire. With this logistical squeeze, we're seeing a cascading effect. Diminished ability for Russia to reinforce Crimea effectively, increased vulnerability of its forces and installations in the peninsula, higher risk to Russian command posts and supply depots, and more opportunities for Ukraine. Press. On the Ukrainian side, the objective is clear. Degrade the enemy's ability to use a strategic corridor, undermine the fortress-like status of Crimea, raise the cost for Russia of maintaining control, and open space for future operations. It is as much about the long game as the immediate strike. Ukraine's leadership understands that the corridor's collapse could be psychologically as significant as it is physical. From the Russian perspective, the risks are deep. With Crimea more isolated, their Black Sea fleet becomes exposed, supply lines more contested, and the need to rely on riskier routes increases. Weakening the corridor also complicates Russia's ability to exploit Crimea as a springboard for operations in southern Ukraine. Analysts point out that the terrain, the infrastructure, and the front lines render that corridor inherently fragile. We must emphasize, this is not just about a single bridge or a road. It's about the entire chain of logistics, from rail yards and fuel depots, the road network through southern Ukraine, the flow into Crimea, and the sustaining of forces there. Every link broken or contested adds to a cumulative strategic effect, and Ukraine is clearly exploiting this. What does this mean going forward? First, expect Russia to devote more resources to defending remaining supply lines, building redundancy, and potentially shifting to more expensive or trickier routes, sea, air, or smaller land conduits. That in turn may open Russian forces to further disruption. Second, for Ukraine, the collapse of the corridor may allow for renewed offensive options in southern Ukraine, increasing pressure on Russian held terrain and stretching Russian logistics yet further. Third, internationally, the shift bolsters Ukraine's negotiating position and complicates Russia's sense of control over the occupied peninsula, possibly affecting long-term outcomes. Let's also recognize the symbolic dimension. Crimea has been central to Russia's narrative of power and expansion, and its land-link status underscored that. A severed corridor shakes not just the military logistics, but the psychological edge and propaganda value. Ukraine is signaling to Russia and the world. Control of Crimea is not guaranteed and supply lines can be struck. We conclude that we are witnessing a turning point, maybe not yet the decisive moment of the war, but one of the pivotal inflection points. If Ukraine continues to apply pressure, exploit logistics choke points, and Russia cannot fully adapt, the battlefield balance in the south could shift. And with Crimea's supply lines under siege, the peninsula may become more isolated, more vulnerable, and more contested than ever before. Stay tuned to this space because the corridors of war are no longer hidden, and those who control them often control the tide. We will continue to monitor intelligence, on-the-ground shifts, and what this means for Crimea, for southern Ukraine, and for the broader strategic picture. Thank you for joining us on this update. I'm your host, and this is the Military Matrix. Make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for future deep dives on the war in Ukraine and beyond.